Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Collar here, and joining me, Steve Palazzolo, formerly of PFF, featured in my book, Football is a Numbers Game, and now the Check the Mic podcast, which is the exact same podcast with Sam Monson, but now hosted by the 33rd team. And Steve, I'm really happy for you guys. The show looks great, sounds great in its new home, and I spent all of yesterday, Monday, cleaning and listening to your recap of the divisional weekend. I was sad that I was not there in Philadelphia because I like covering football games. That's life. It happens. But I really enjoyed you guys' breakdown. So how are you enjoying the playoffs, sir?
Been great. I appreciate you listening to us. And yes, if you have a 2-hour plus task to do, I think we're a good listen for that. I think we can help you pass the time if you're cleaning the house or whatever you might be doing. But I've enjoyed the playoffs. I think, you had, a couple of years ago, we had those divisional round games and everything came down to a final field goal. I still think these great storylines and competitiveness, and it's been fun to this point. I don't know if you would enjoy, do you enjoy covering snow games and, being out there in the cold? Because I kind of like watching games from the comfort of my own home when it's cold and snowy out there.
Most of the time, if it's a snowy location, I'm inside of a press box anyway.
I know.
There was a snowy-ish game in Buffalo in 2022 with the Vikings, which was an all-time classic. Justin Jefferson makes the one-handed catch. Josh Allen fumbled the QB sneak, and we went to overtime and everything. But the press box there did get a little chilly. I was up against the window. I was okay, though. Yeah. But since I hail from Buffalo, when I saw people complaining about snow games, I was like, guys, you just can't be serious. This is magic in front of us. And I know Matthew Stafford wouldn't normally just fumble a handoff, so I guess, but it's football, man. We got to play in the elements. What are we talking about here? I thought it was a really special weekend because of that.
It's an amazing sport that starts like you could have 100-degree hot and humid games at the beginning. You can have snow games at the end. You literally have to face all of the elements across the football season, which helps, make it unique.
Yeah, I thought so. I just thought it was also like the way that it looks on TV, the snow globe effect.
Absolutely.
And you guys are football players. Go play in the snow. It's fine. So I want to start out, though, with the Vikings and then get into some of your guys' takeaways that caught my ear yesterday as I was cleaning out one of our side rooms that we've never unboxed stuff since we moved in. So let me give you a couple paths for the Vikings at quarterback, and you tell me which one you like. There is the path of franchise tagging Darnold and trying to run it back. There's the path of franchise tagging and trading Darnold and trying to get that number of 3 draft picks they have to go up to maybe 4 or 5. And then there's the path of trying to sign Darnold to a short-term type of deal. I don't think that they would just let him walk because there's so many QB needy teams. But of those 3 main paths, which one do you like?
I think tag and trade is the most intriguing just because you can get the most back. And, it's got to be tough from a team building perspective because the most optimistic Vikings front office person or coach probably did not lay out what happened this season, how good Darnold was for 95% of the season, just how good the offense was and, him having a career year, times 10. So I don't even know if they expected that. I've joked with you. I mean, it's the best bridge quarterback in NFL history. He's up there, right? He's in this discussion because he was signed as a bridge, right? He was signed as you're the bridge. You're the just in case we don't draft somebody, just in case we just at least need a starter, right? Like that's what he was drafted. I mean, it's signed as. And so I wonder if you just kind of go back to that and say, okay, the added benefit of this season is what we can now get in return, and that would be draft capital. It is fascinating to me that Kwesi, who's often seen as one of the most analytically inclined general managers, is sitting here really low in draft capital. And I think it's kind of paired with the roster when they've been able to go get a whole bunch of free agents and veterans. Maybe you don't need as many draft picks, right? If there is a balance I always joke about, hey, you want to draft 12 to 15 times a year. We've seen Minnesota do that before. We also know that you can't literally bring in 36 players, over a 3-year period. So I do think it's a great time, though, to maybe get draft capital back. So if they could do a tag and trade, there are enough QB needy teams. You look at that top 10, what the Giants need to do at 3 and what the Raiders, they're sitting there at 6, and the Jets, depending on the Rodgers decision, there's enough teams that really need a quarterback that I think Darnold impressed enough people that, hey, the second chance with him as a multi-year starter, I think could go through.
Well, and I think that there's enough interest around the NFL because there's so few free agent quarterbacks and there's so few draft pick quarterbacks. I'm even struggling to see Cam Ward as any type of prospect that's even compared to a JJ McCarthy or a Michael Penix or, of course, any of those top three, which were kind of historically good for last year. And we saw a lot of that play out with Jaden Daniels and even how Drake May looked and so forth. So I think this draft class is just such an enormous drop off that there's QB desperate franchises that haven't been good in forever, whether it's the Raiders. Our friend Eric Eager used to call them the Oakland Raiders and said he would change when they won a playoff game. So I've adopted that on the show, calling them Oakland still. But even a friend of mine who hosts a talk show in Tennessee was texting me like, do you think that they would take the 35th pick for Darnold? I'm like, yes. I mean, I think
Yeah.
so. Like if they could swing that, because your comp pick is only going to be a third rounder after 2026. So if your instead compensation is a second round draft pick early in the second, that would be a home run for them if they want to move on from him right now. And that's the other thing, as I've talked about on the show, it has made people very angry, the idea of bringing back Sam Darnold even on a franchise tag. Did the last two games, because when I was on your show, you asked me, like, are they going to bring him back? And I said, well, I think we've gone too far, right? They have 14 wins and then they collapsed in the last two games. How much did that shape your opinion? And how much do you think it may have shaped their opinion about Sam Darnold and what they should do here?
Unfortunately, I think it did shape my opinion a little bit too much. I kept he just kept ticking all the boxes, right? I mean, that was the thing when you have a Sam Darnold, and look, I do this. I kind of do this with Baker Mayfield and Geno Smith still because of pre-perception before they got to Seattle and Tampa Bay. You just kind of think like, are they ever going to go back? Are they going to go back to what they were before? Is Geno Smith? He was a 10-year backup. Does he really is he really a multi-year starter? Is Baker really going to do that? So I've kind of had that in the back of my mind, and I've, fair or unfair, I've treated Darnold in the same way. And all along the season, it's like, all right, we've seen it in 3-week stretches. Okay, he made it to week 6. All right, we're getting to the second half of the year. Oh, the Jags game. He tried to blow the Jags game. They're one of the worst teams. He tried to lose it and he bounced back. And I love the way he had bounced back from adversity throughout the whole season. And look, we don't have an opportunity to see him bounce back from 2 games of adversity. We don't have that, right? It's just the offseason. Just like we don't get to see Joe Milton come back down to earth, right? He had his great game. It was the last game. And that's the last thing you saw. But you don't get to see the next 3 weeks. So, look, I also wouldn't hate bringing him back, but I do think at the end of the day, if you can look at this from like, what did we think last year at this time? And you could say, we got way more out of Darnold than we expected. We can now actually recoup draft capital, get something back, and go back to that plan. And the plan of JJ McCarthy, who looked pretty good for one preseason game, the plan there is partly trust in Kevin O'Connell. And now we have multiple quarterbacks of evidence, right? And when we're evaluating coaches, you don't often get coaches with multiple quarterbacks of evidence of good. And that's, to me, it's a small sample size, but it's like, that's how you separate coaches, right? Andy Reid's one with multiple quarterbacks. John Harbaugh's one with multiple quarterbacks. Kyle Shanahan has done it. Now Kevin O'Connell has helped Kirk Cousins elevate his game well beyond his baseline. Sam Darnold elevate his game well beyond his baseline. I think if you're Kwesi and the Vikings, you have to say, we're going to take that chance that Kevin O'Connell will do the same thing with our pass catchers, hopefully a revamped offensive line or some improvement on the interior, and they're going to get the most out of JJ McCarthy. And now we have the added benefit. We have the benefit of the first contract quarterback, right? So I think you kind of go back to that plan. And look, if Darnold had 2 good games at the end and they just happen to lose, I would consider bringing him back and just say, okay, it's like known versus unknown. He's almost a known commodity right now, but I do feel like he almost went from known to slightly unknown off that 2-game sample.
Look, guys, I am just about at the age where I'm starting to notice that hairline fading a little bit. So if you're struggling with the same problem, allow me to make a suggestion. Give Hims a try. Try Hims Hair Loss Solutions, and you'll be joining the hundreds of thousands of subscribers who found their hair again. Hims provides you with a convenient, quality access to a range of hair loss treatments that work all from the comfort of your couch. Just answer a few questions, and a medical provider will determine if treatment is right for you. And if prescribed, your treatment is sent directly to you with no shipping cost. The process is simple, 100% online, and there are no uncomfortable doctor visits. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to your ongoing care. Hims has hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, and they can help you get your confidence back with visibly thicker and fuller hair. Start your online visit today at hims.com/purple insider. That's HIMS.com/purple insider for your personalized hair loss treatment options. Hims.com/purple insider. Results vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil and finasteride. Prescription products require an online consultation with healthcare provider and will determine if a prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. This is why the quarterback position is such an unbelievable mystery, because you also look at what the Rams defensive line did to Jalen Hurts, and then you go, oh, well, wait a minute. And then you watch the tape back, and it's not just me, but it's also the tape watching Illuminati on the internet. And you see a lot of people saying, well, was he really given the resources? Well, they really didn't block it up. Well, they didn't really give options to him, because I think Kevin O'Connell all year long built his offense to throw deep down the field with Darnold. And then when that was taken away, they didn't have enough answers. And also, what I noticed from, and this is why the PFF grades can be so useful, is you could see in the middle of the season the offensive line playing really well. And they were ranked as high as top 5 in pass blocking midseason. And then Jonathan Gannon came in and ran a bunch of confusing blitzes and stunts and stuff. And all of a sudden, they just melted. And the rest of the games, except for one against Green Bay, they were a bad offensive line. And by the end, they could not handle any of that stuff. And what got them? Corner blitzes, delayed blitzes, stunts and twists, just destroyed them at the end. So there's all this sort of context required as you evaluate Sam Darnold. They also, look, how did Philly win the game? They ran with Saquon Barkley. The Vikings don't have a running game. They were 28th in EPA on the ground. All these things matter to the evaluation, or at least they should. But I think sometimes with football, we know this. It's just, well, look, the last thing I saw was really bad, and we should just make a change. To me, it comes down to how ready they think McCarthy is. Because if you look at who they're going to face next year, as far as their schedule, it ain't going to be the AFC South again. It's going to be Baltimore. It's going to be Pittsburgh. You know how nasty, as far as talent goes, Cleveland is on the defensive side, playing the AFC North. Like, it's going to be harder. And the kid has only thrown 700 passes since he graduated high school. I just think that's a lot to ask. That's my only pushback on the, just go to JJ McCarthy.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I think, look, a lot of it will come down to, like you said, internally, they probably have the best feel for how ready JJ McCarthy is. And if there's any doubt or indecision, maybe you try to do a tag on Darnold and just, steal an extra year out of him. Because I think, a tag doesn't kill your 1-year cap situation. I think that's easy enough to manipulate. So I wouldn't hate either one. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't hate either one. The one that's intriguing, though, is, as a fan base, I think it's difficult. This happened with Seattle a couple of years ago. You come out of a season and it's like, all right, we got to fix the offensive line. We got to fix this. We need a couple corners. And then you're like, we have 3 draft picks? Like, really? We have 3 draft picks? And so I do think, I don't want to, I'm not trying to say this disrespectfully to players, but if you look at players as assets, right? They're not. But if you just look from an asset perspective, Sam Darnold can either become a player for you next year, or maybe he could be turned into multiple players for you next year. And you're right. I mean, the QB decision it's almost unfairly too important, I think, to general managers and evaluators. Getting it right makes you look like a stud. And, if you get it wrong, you're fired. So it's unfortunate. But I think that's how they have to look at it. We might be able to steal one more year of Darnold, maybe a little bit more of JJ development time, or maybe just as a hedge, right? We've got 2 starters and we'll figure out who's going to play. And maybe there's a switch in week 7, who knows? But the other alternative is maybe multiple players or one key player, right? Pick 35, whatever it might be. So that's the challenge there. And that they have to make. But I think they've been given an opportunity to get you, because they chose to go into this year with 3 draft picks, right? They chose to trade up to go get Dallas Turner, get that, get a high end player maybe a year early. They chose to do that, but now it's almost like a get out of jail free card where it's like, maybe you might be able to steal a couple draft picks back to the situation you chose to be into. That actually could be better for the roster long term.
And there's just a couple of things that it might come down to that we really don't know. And one is how far along McCarthy is in his recovery,
Right.
if he had any setbacks, or we just don't know that. He just started throwing the football on the field like last week. And OTAs are not that far away. And I mean, anyone who saw him on TV knows he's going to have to eat some peanut butter and mac and cheese and put on a few pounds. Like, there's a long way to go. And I think maybe their backup plan, if they do this, would be to have Daniel Jones re-sign and be that 1-year quarterback to be the just in case. But you're still talking about, I think, a talent drop off that's significant from a guy who was a top 10 quarterback in Sam Darnold. So you could get caught in a spot where your quarterback's not ready, but Daniel Jones isn't good enough to win you anything, and you're just stuck kind of in the middle for next year. But if they get back, that 35th pick or something, that would be just too much to decline. It'd be like, okay, I mean, you're basically getting a first round pick there to go along with it, and McCarthy's your future anyway. You just kind of have to jump into that pool, I think. Now, the rest of the roster, though, Steve, Kevin O'Connell made it clear they've got to rebuild the interior of the offensive line. But something that you talked about on the show with Sam really caught my ear because it resonated with me after watching the playoffs. I don't think offensive lines have any answer for defensive lines right now in the NFL. The answer is Jaden Daniels is really fast. Josh Allen cannot be tackled. Mahomes cannot be tackled. And Jalen Hurts runs for 70 yards in a playoff game where his offensive line actually gets killed in pass protection. I don't think the answer is as simple. And of course I would do this. I would sign interior linemen. But I don't think the answer these days is as simple as, hey, just sign Mekhi Becton and you're good to go and Vikings fixed. I think it's more complicated than that schematically.
And Becton was right in the middle of getting wrecked this week. He had a really nice block on the first long Saquon run, but he's also getting popped by Jared Verse and on a stunt and getting knocked over at 360 pounds. It was a really fascinating development this year, Matt. There was so many games where I was like, the offensive line is either unprepared or confused. They're not on the same page with the quarterback. They're not on the same page from a protection standpoint. My friend Bobby Slowick in Houston, I thought they had a ton of issues out there this year. As bad as Deshaun Watson was with Cleveland, also when he was in there, the offensive line was horrendous at anything, right? Any sort of, the way you described it, twists, stunts, any sort of trickeration up at the line of scrimmage. And we saw it on the other end from Brian Flores led defense, right? With Minnesota confusing opposing offenses. So it's one of the stories of the season for me across the league, how offenses are going to just do a better job, be better prepared. I don't know if this is one of those multi-year, we don't practice enough and we just can't possibly get into a game prepared enough because of how much practice time has been killed, or if it's just a 1-year blip. But yes, talent needs to be better, but coaching needs to be better across the league. And I'm talking good coaches, right? I'm talking guys that have, had perfectly fine pass protection teams, teams that in pass protection in the past, or Kevin O'Connell, I think is a fantastic coach. The whole Shanahan scheme, who I think for years, the on paper offensive line would overachieve relative to probably expectations because they had a lot of misdirection. They moved the pocket. They did a lot of different things to maybe protect those lines. So it is one of those stories I think that we need to keep an eye on, is how the offenses now fight back. And offense wasn't down, but there were just some games where guys get sacked 7 times, or they were under pressure on every key third down and they didn't have answers. So I think that is something. And you're absolutely right when you talk about Darnold. That context is crucial. And in that context of the way the line fell off, the inconsistent run game, the other context, I do think that's the best passing trio probably in the NFL, having JJ, Addison, and Hawkinson, right? That in a really nice, Jalen Naylor as a number 3 with some speed. So there is some context there, though, as far as like what led to Darnold's season. But certainly you don't want to be so fragile that if the offensive line or just pass protection collapses that much that you really can't do anything. And that's a little bit of what we saw. Like the Darnold's numbers under pressure those last 2 games were just horrendous. And those are always tough to predict regardless. But yeah, when he goes on like a 5 for 20 clip with multiple sacks and turnovers, that's tough to win that way.
Well, and a lot of the year, what Sam Darnold would do is just escape and make a play. And
Right.
a lot of his biggest and most impressive plays were under pressure. And going into that game, which you guys have always talked about how pressure performance is inconsistent, going into that game, he's one of the top quarterbacks under pressure all season, statistically. But then when it came from multiple sides and he didn't have an escape route, he was just running backwards and looking ridiculous. Where early in the season against Atlanta or against Seattle, he was able to do some of that and find space. But if you can't block and you don't have another answer, and I think that's the thing about Kevin O'Connell is he kind of takes it as a personal challenge. Like, if you guys are going to play too deep against Justin Jefferson all the time, watch me solve this with my deep double moves, triple moves, whatever out there. And it's amazing to watch on tape when it works. But on fourth down, when you have one short route and other guys, everyone else 15 yards down the field, you go, this can't be everything to you. And I think in the playoffs, when you're one dimensional, that's where you get beat because someone like Buffalo, they weren't throwing the ball that well against the Ravens and they just ran and ran and ran. And the Vikings not being able to run. And maybe it's a little bit of me and when I grew up and we loved the same era of football, the Fred Taylors and the Sean Alexanders and the Eddie Georges and so forth. But I think that there now becomes an emphasis on making teams pay for some of these things. And you're taking the snap and they're sending this guy this way and that way. That's easy to get out of a gap in the run game. And if they're going to play two safeties in the parking lot back there, that's two guys that are going to need a lot of time to get up to the line of scrimmage. And the Vikings, it was actually kind of crazy this year. They ran way more on first down than they did pass, but they never ran on second down. And I think that they became kind of predictable with this. I just think that you're going to have this run game that can get you explosives and that can keep you on the field. And the Vikings just haven't had it since O'Connell got here.
It's going to be interesting because I think, again, the average media person or the average football discourse is like, well, look at what Saquon and Derrick Henry have done this year. Look what Jahmyr Gibbs has done, number 12 overall pick. Look at what they've done for their offenses. But we could also realistically say, well, Lamar Jackson's the driver. The Eagles' offensive line and A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Jalen Hurts, they were there. And then you threw Saquon on top. And Saquon he has a special ability. Like when you do blow a gap, he's going to take it 70. No, not many other people have that. Jahmyr Gibbs has that ability. Jahmyr Gibbs was the cherry on top, but you have to have those other pieces in front, right? Bijan Robinson's pretty special too, but he didn't necessarily transform Atlanta's offense, but he's fantastic, right? He's a great piece to have there. So it's going to be a tricky one. I'm interested to see what happens to Ashton Genty if, the Cowboys are like, oh, he's going to be the guy he's our Saquon, But to me, the thing about offense is having answers. And if you have so you want to be good at running back, you want to be good everywhere. So that what the Lions can do, what the Lions get 3rd and 5, they just run inside zone. Little trickeration, they just run inside zone and they can trust it. So that takes pressure off the quarterback. That puts a little more indecision into the defense. And that's what you just described, right? It's like the pieces were good in Minnesota, but maybe missing a little bit of the indecision on the defensive side of the ball. So if they zig, we can zag. And to me, that's what good offense is always having answers. And part of that was the way teams played Darnold. I think they did a better job of compressing the pocket and taking away those escape routes. Now, you say the same thing. You're going to watch this weekend. You say the same thing about Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. Don't let them escape. Take away the escape routes. Fine. They're going to sit there and go through you don't want to let them escape. They'll just sit there, go through their reads and hit an open receiver or whatever it is. Or they'll still escape. Or, you know what I mean? Like they have their own answers for it. So that's what it always comes down to for me as a player or as a scheme is having answers. And if you have to have, and you need to be able to have games where you run the ball 35 times and win, right? That's going to happen a couple times a year. You want to have the ability to run a lot and win. You want to have the ability to drop back 40, 45 times in certain games, right? If you go up against a great run stopping defense and you have mismatches on the outside to just chuck it around, quick passing game. So to me, that's balance on offense is the ability to have answers and win in any given way. And certainly could see Minnesota wanting to go that route and having, better run game answers.
And it's really been 3 years, and it's funny to say because they've won so many football games, but it's been 3 years of if the quarterback's not on today, you're not really scoring. And
Yeah.
so you better take the ball away, you better make your field goals like they did in Jacksonville, but hey, the quarterback's not really on his game. You can't just lean on the run game, and they also just really don't have a great quick game, a great screen game, and that speaks to the answers. I noticed that the Lions blitzed 47% of the time against Jaden Daniels. Number one, he ran away from several of them and had 50 yards rushing, but also they threw 10 times behind the line of scrimmage, and I think 9 more times between 0 and 9 yards. I mean, that was more than half of his passes. He's basically just catching it and throwing it. Clean pocket, his time to release was 2.2 seconds. I mean, he's catching it and getting rid of it. There's nothing Detroit could do there. That's just not what the Vikings are doing offensively. And I think they need to figure out how to do that offensively for going forward here. Now, I want to ask you about the landscape of the NFC because it's so fascinating to me, Steve, when we get to the playoffs and we think we kind of know everything for the future. And then all of a sudden, our brains get shifted. And I think with Jaden Daniels, it's not hyperbolic to say that the NFC has its guy, that the NFC has been like, we don't have Rodgers here anymore. We don't have Breeze here anymore. Anybody can make the Super Bowl now, but that may be a change in. And I was thinking about the ripple effect for this because now that Washington has this guy, they can spend. They can be the team that people want to play for all of a sudden. Magic Johnson's there, man. And so the Vikings are going into this free agency period thinking, well, everyone wants to be a Viking, right? Kevin O'Connell's so nice. But there's other teams now, and I'm looking at this Washington team thinking there's going to be a lot more of this as we go forward.
Yeah, and there's elements of this that are like a little unfortunate that so much of the league is QB driven and it feels predictable. That's how the AFC has felt, right? You know, Mahomes is going to be in the AFC Championship. Just a question of which other elite quarterback is going to be facing him, and that's literally been the case, right? It's either been Josh Allen or Joe Burrow, or Lamar Allen or Burrow, right? It's been or Brady, right? I mean, that's who's played in the AFC Championship since forever. And so the NFC hasn't had that, right? It's almost like, college football is less QB driven, right? If you have a Joe Burrow and he goes on a run, great, but it's less QB driven. We just saw Will Howard and Riley Leonard play in the national title game. The NFL doesn't have that nearly as much. And the NFC has kind of been more like college, right? It's like, who has the best team? You have a great all around 2022 Eagles team, and Niners in 19 and 23 were outstanding all around, and the Rams put it all together in 21, but no one had a QB, like a clear top 4 or 5 QB carrying them. And so I think what you're highlighting is, Jaden Daniels might be that guy. He might be QB5 in the NFL or whatever that number is. And I think Adam Peters did a great job, right? He had one of those off seasons that just looks pedestrian on paper that works. And look, it's also revisionist to say, well, of course, like we knew this from day one. We knew that the Commanders were this good from day one. We knew that, Jeremy Chin and Frankie Louvu and Bobby Wagner and all these guys were just going to work. Dorrance Armstrong, but they came together, man. They came together, and you look back, it's like 10 million for this guy and 6 million for this guy, and Biotish for a 3-year deal to solidify the center spot. Like those things add up, and so I think that bodes well for what Washington has done. You have the cheap quarterback who's a stud, and then now you can, like, De'Ami Brown shouldn't be a great wide receiver too. He's playing like that in the playoffs. But man, they were in the Ayuk sweepstakes, before the season, right? So they can upgrade a few different spots, and I think that is scary, right? I'm not ready to put them in the NFC Championship for the next 10 years, but they might have that advantage if Jaden Daniels continues down the path that he showed as a rookie.
I guess what I'm thinking about is just the teams that the Vikings are going to be battling against. They really have to hope that Jaden Daniels isn't Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen.
Yeah.
And I mean, his Josh Allen trait is that he doesn't get shook up by anything. I mean, he just goes into Detroit, and we saw Sam Darnold look very nervous and anxious in that game. And Jaden Daniels was having a cup of tea outside on a nice sunny morning. I was like, what the heck is with this guy? He was so calm. And you look at Penix, played pretty well at the end of that season. And now Atlanta's going to have cap troubles that they caused themselves from Kirk Cousins, but still, like, they're going to have a lot to work with there. If Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson take off, there's another sort of rising team, again, that hasn't really existed with young quarterbacks a whole lot outside of Jalen Hurts and Brock Purdy, but I think these guys are a different level of talent. I wonder what you think about the Lions with Ben Johnson leaving and going to Chicago, because I think it speaks to Dan Campbell talking about last year how hard it is to repeat this year in and year out. The Jimmies and Joes are not going anywhere, but the X's and O's are about to change in Detroit. And that was a pretty special situation. But also, if you're the Vikings, you're like, he's gone. Oh, wait, now he's still in the division. So how do you process that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be challenging for Detroit, but there's the foundation's still so good, right? I mean, it's still. I mean, I don't want to say it's always players over plays. We know that they go hand in hand, but we've seen other teams have to deal with this. You know, New England lost coordinators along the way in the 2000s, right? I mean, they didn't miss a beat. Ben Johnson's unique, though. I mean, it's a unique style with how many trick plays he brings out there and where they're coming from. If Kansas City lost Andy Reid, I would, they've never lost Andy Reid. You know what I mean? So like New England lost their coordinators, both sides of the ball, but they always had Belichick. Kansas City lost other people besides Andy Reid, but they always had Andy Reid. And by the way, they also have Brady and Mahomes, and that is probably more important than anybody that's calling the plays. And then in Detroit, you don't have that, right? It's like Goff and all these playmakers. Ben Johnson is the guy pulling all that together. So is Mark Brunell next in line because he's the QB coach? I don't know. I have no idea. I'm a Mark Brunell fan as a player. I have no idea if he could call plays. Who knows? So yeah, I think it could hurt Detroit, and I think that's what makes it so sad for Lions fans. I think that's why this was supposed to be the year, and they could stomach losing a couple coordinators, and then you look at they've been unbelievable at building that roster, right? I think the Goff deal, you kind of steal a starting quarterback without having to pay the signing bonus, so that essentially is the mid-tier quarterback contract. They draft extremely well, have the 4 picks in the top 50 that all hit in 2023. But you start to like those guys are getting 1 year further, right? Aiden Hutchinson's got to get paid. All these stars that you have to become $20+ million players soon, right? And so you're 1 year closer to that. So I think that's where Brad Holmes has done a great job. And now the pressure's on to be able to continue that. How do you maintain this roster? I also think they've survived this year because of their depth. They ran out of depth at the end, but they survived because of, creating a 2 and 3 deep across positions that allowed them to handle a lot of injuries. So they've had that flexibility from a cap perspective of the last couple of years to be able to build depth extremely well. So I think it's a challenge going forward, losing a Ben Johnson. You still have the culture, you still have Dan Campbell, but you need somebody pulling it all together, and everybody's different the way they call plays. So it's going to be really tough to replace a guy like Ben Johnson, who's been so good for multiple years now.
And what do you think of him in Chicago? First time head coach and a very, very different quarterback from Jared Goff. I feel like Jared Goff's superpower is that he sees the field really well. And in general, when he's not popped in the noggin, makes pretty good decisions. And that's not been Caleb Williams. He hasn't seen the field. He tries to scramble and escape the pocket right after catching the football. How do you think that is going to mesh with Caleb Williams?
Theoretically, I think an offensive coordinator is special when they can adjust to their players. Now, I say that, but Kyle Shanahan, I don't know if he actually does. Like, I think Kyle Shanahan's special, but it's more like he finds the right guy to fit what he wants to do. And he was like, Trey Lance was never going to work there, right? And we like to oversimplify this and say Kyle Shanahan made Jimmy Garoppolo great and makes Brock Purdy great, and he makes all these guys great. Therefore, he can make anybody great. But it's more so he's got a style of quarterback that he can make great. So that's going to be the test for Ben Johnson. Can he make any style of quarterback super efficient, uber efficient, right? And so a coordinator either has to be special at having a scheme or a system that they could put a particular type of player in and have them always play above their expectations, Jimmy G, Brock Purdy, or you have a guy, and this is where Andy Reid, I think, was special. Andy Reid worked with Brett Favre, who had a certain style, Donovan McNabb, who was an option college quarterback, and he turned him into a West Coast offense quarterback when that was like a real thing, like a completely different world. And then he took Michael Vick, who had never really achieved his his ceiling and almost made him an MVP candidate. So like, Andy Reid has this ability to adjust. And then he took Patrick Mahomes, completely changed his college style, and turned him to one of the best ever, right? So that's where I think that the test is going to be for Ben Johnson, because I think you're right. I mean, if he tries to say, hey, here's how Jared did it, and here's what I need you to do, there'll be elements of that. But then there's other elements of we need to figure out what that balance is. And I think the best thing the Chiefs ever did with Mahomes, a guy who coming out of college would face a 3-man rush 50% of the time and leave the pocket about 50% of the time. And they figured out how to say, you're allowed to leave the pocket, but you got to win within, X amount of time. And they found that balance. And so you have guy knows how to win within the scheme. Guy knows how to win with outside of the scheme. That's the balance that Ben Johnson has to find. And so my cop out though is like, I don't know how he's going. I don't know Ben Johnson. I don't know how he's going to command a locker room. I don't know how he's going to be the CEO of the team. I know he calls good football plays. I know he has a unique run game that attacks, uses every single run concept. I know he attacks every blade of grass. He does all of that stuff well. I have no idea how he's going to do this as the head coach, right? And none of us actually do. So it's going to be interesting. But I just want to see how he adjusts to Caleb Williams, right? That's going to be the biggest thing.
Right. Because if you try to run the same stuff, he's not going to see it the way that Goff sees it, and he's not going to play on time the way that Goff plays on time. So how can you kind of manipulate what he can do and his ability to throw the ball down the field and things like that arm talent? I think probably moving the pocket, rolling him out and things like that so he could see down the field better. I just felt like when I watched him that he would drop back and he just didn't. There were open receivers, but he could not see those guys running open.
Yeah, I thought with Williams, there were weeks where it was almost like, okay, coach told me win from the pocket, so I'm going to do it. And I'm going to sit here and very slowly go through my reads. And then the next week, they're like, all right, man, you got to play free. And he's like, all right, I'm going to play free. And the Vikings game, he's got like 5 big time throws and he's just, rolling out and flipping it up and making big plays. And it's like, okay, how do you bottle up both of those and make it flow? And that's where, Shanahan talks about play calling as telling a story. There's probably this storytelling aspect that you can keep Caleb Williams engaged. And it's like, all right, first play, we're going to boot you out, get you out there. You throw on the run as well as anybody I've ever seen. Then we're going to give you a little quick game. Then we're going to give you a little shot play. Then we're going to give you a little of everything, right? So it's not like, all right, read it out for these 12 straight plays on, pure drop back. But it's got to be a balance and it's got to be a story and it's got to keep them engaged. And I think Caleb Williams is capable of all that, and Ben Johnson probably is too. But it's got to be that balance that just plays to his skill set and keeps. At the end of the day, he has to feel like he's playing with the natural ability that he has, and he didn't do that in Chicago this year. It's felt like he was thinking way too much, and he's more of a natural, instinctual player like a Mahomes stylistically, and OC's got to get the best out of him. Play instinctually, go react and play.
I really think that the Vikings landscape of how hard it's going to be to compete in this division really depends on how Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams connect, because if they work, it's a problem. And if they don't, it's the same old Bears that they've been able to take care of for many years. So I know you're used to podcasting for no less than 2.5 hours, but I only have one more question for you, which is
like
yeah, I know, right? This was just this went by in an eye blink. But people can't clean out their entire rooms just with this podcast. So that's why I do 10 of them a week or whatever. But when it comes to this championship weekend, it's my favorite and least favorite because it feels like it's over. And it's also the best matchups, iconic games, all that sort of stuff. What is from each game sort of the best conversation you're looking forward to coming out of it, and the worst for both of the games?
I mean, any sort of Josh Allen can't beat Mahomes discourse, I think is bad. I mean, but that is the best, right? I mean, the legacy stuff matters. The QB legacy stuff matters. We talk about Dan Marino differently. We were talking about Peyton Manning differently for a while until he won one, even though he wasn't good on that Super Bowl run, the first one or the second one. I think that stuff is interesting and it does matter. And, the Chiefs trying to go for a three-peat is unique and special. So that game, It's also fascinating that the Bills continue to win in the regular season and not in the postseason. I think that stuff is interesting. So I think that's good discourse. The bad discourse is when it's like even if Mahomes loses, somebody's be like, "Oh man, Mahomes, he's Josh Allen's the new GOAT." I mean, it's like, well, let's not get too crazy here. So there'll be some bad discourse always, but I think that game's always intriguing because of their previous matchups. And then, man, Jaden Daniels has a chance to do something special with Washington, because the other part too is like when you come into the season, nobody said Washington had this incredible supporting cast, and this is where the quarterback is so important. And over time, QB wins do matter. You know, how the heck did he do that? How did he take this rebuilding roster and help lead them to the NFC Championship? And yes, Bobby Wagner and all those guys I mentioned, all those guys matter too. But nobody's looking around being like, "Oh, Jaden Daniels, he's in the best situation for the rookies," right? That was JJ. JJ was in the best situation for rookies, right? Or Caleb Williams was in the best situation. Jaden Daniels has a chance to continue to just be special, whereas the Eagles are just this great all-around team. I think they're the best, well-run. Howie Roseman's done a great job. Doesn't mean they hit on everything, but their process is sound and they build depth, and they always put themselves on the green to make a putt. The putt being, hey, if you hit the putt, you win the Super Bowl, right? They're always on the green and in range. So I think it's going to be great weekend, great discussions. It is also unfortunate because we forget the teams that lose. Like, if Washington loses, it's good season, Jaden. Maybe we'll see you next year. But it is the Eagles year. This is the Eagles, and you only like everything was great for the Eagles because they're going to the Super Bowl, right? You kind of forget about the losers. So can't wait to see what happens. And I'm always looking for like a different Super Bowl matchup too. Or so if it was Bills Eagles or something like that, wouldn't hate some, or Bills Commanders, some real fresh blood, come Super Bowl week when we go out there.
Bills Commanders sends me back to a pretty
91.
tough childhood memory of getting so excited. Oh, the Bills are back in the Super Bowl for the second straight year. This is the time they do it. And it was just over. I don't know. I would put the 91 Washington team against anybody in history. From like number 1 to number how many ever eligible players they had back then. I mean, it just was unbelievably stacked, and they steamrolled the Bills, and it was just over very quick. If that's the matchup this time, I don't think that'll happen, but maybe this is the year. I see some Vikings fans talking about how we don't want Buffalo to win. They've always been our cousin in the East kind of thing of tragedies.
Oh, yeah.
And like, I don't know. I think I love new champions. So we'll see what happens. But check the Mike podcast. We'll be breaking it down. You and Sam Monson, as always. And you have a whole chapter in my book, Football is a Numbers Game, if people want to know how you as a baseball player were once cut for Jose Canseco. So that's in the book. But Steve Palazzolo, you are the best, man. I really appreciate all the stuff that you guys put out. And we'll talk again soon. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it, Matt.